So we have a great panel planned for you today. We're going to go through questions across the beginning of how to meet a VC, what actually gets you a meeting, what VCs are actually looking for in first meetings, and then a little bit about due diligence, what VCs are looking for in diligence and in the diligence process, and then finally what risks and realities are true for healthcare that are maybe not true for other industries, and how that differs across different stages. The other advantage that we have here today is that Ruth is a late stage investor and Daniella is a very early stage investor. Sean is also early stage investor and I am an early stage investor, but we have the diverse insights from a growth stage investor. So I think we'll have really interesting discussion today. And with that, I'll let our three panelists introduce themselves. We're all going to discuss a little bit at first what stage they invest in, what industries, and the most recent health tech deal that they did.
Thank you. Awesome. My name is Ruth. As Steph said, I'm an associate investor at Windham Capital Partners. I joined Windham a little over a year ago. Windham's been around for nearly 2 decades in New York City, investing in medical devices, health tech, biotech, diagnostics, tech-enabled services. So really huge gamut sector-wise in terms of, across the healthcare and life sciences. As Windham's grown and scaled, we've kind of shifted later stage. So we've done everything from seed companies all the way to pre-IPO, even invested in some IPOs in a few cases. Now we're focused on just commercial growth stage medical device and health tech companies. Ideally, we're leading or co-leading every financing we do, sitting on the board of the company and really playing an active role in driving the growth of the business. So typically it's the last money to reach break even and sustained EBITDA and cash flow. So on the software health tech side, these companies have referenceable customers, reoccurring contracts with major health systems, pharma companies, payers, or physician groups, and they're kind of on that path to profitability and need the last financing to get them there. Most recent investment with a medical device company, so I'll do the most recent health tech one, which is a company called TaylorMed, which actually is based in New York City.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniella. I'm a principal with 2048 Ventures. We are earliest stage investors, so we focus on pre-seed and seed with checks that typically range from $500K up to $3 million. As a fund, we focus on vertical AI, deep tech, health and bio, and I lead the health practice. We've invested in a bunch of different industries within the health vertical, ranging from tech-enabled services to brick and mortar network of clinics to longevity to true data and AI infrastructures that underlie both traditional and also digital health. The most recent investment was a very early company. Their name is Pocket, and I think ultimately it came down to team. We had to invest in this team. They're doing front office AI, starting in PT and expanding to lots of exciting things from there.
So Sean Day, investor at Rock Health Capital. We're a pre-seed through Series A firm. We exclusively invest in health tech, and we actually sit alongside a separate business called Rock Health Advisory. They're a strategy consulting practice that works with enterprise companies on mostly their external innovation strategies. And so the platform sort of sits between the two sides of the market, and we hope we can make useful connections between startups and enterprises. Most recent health tech deal we did, company, haven't announced it yet, but they build agentic infrastructure for health system supply chains. So announcing it soon.
So we're going to start out with a topic that I think is always really interesting for founders, which is how do you meet VCs? Do you need a warm intro? Can you reach out to investors cold? Typically this varies a little bit across all stages. Tell me on average in a week how many startups you meet and what percentage of those startups are from cold intros, and if they're from warm intros, who sends you these kinds of intros?
Typically it ranges between 5 to 15, really depends on the week. To start, I'll say 90% of cold outreach is AI generated that I get. You could totally tell sometimes they have the wrong name, they have the wrong fund, or they're like, we loved your investment in this company. Never heard of it, completely wrong stage. And that's not to say that cold doesn't work if you actually make sure that it's a fit or, are clear that a human wrote this and this is what your company does, and you attach a pitch deck, like absolutely we have had investments come from companies reaching out cold. That said, majority are from warm sources. I would say top is other VCs. The highest signal is if it's from another VC that we're friends with, that we do deals with, and they're investing and they say, we have so much conviction in this company, here's this gift. That is the highest signal. Another very high signal is another investor, even if they passed, that's not like a negative signal always. And then another actually very high signal is companies within our portfolio, if you know a founder. And also we've had many warm introductions from awesome founders that we have met, and maybe their company wasn't a fit, but we've stayed in touch, think they're awesome humans, and they have smart friends. So it usually comes from some of those sources as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of that. Warm intros are great. We've invested out of cold. I sometimes think that the metric of getting to a first meeting isn't quite the right thing to focus on. I think it's getting to a second meeting. I would measure yourself on that. And because often I'll take a warm intro from an investor, but sometimes that's to build my relationship with that investor, and I'm interested, but I might not have that meeting circled on my calendar in advance. So I focus on getting to second meetings, and I think there's signaling that happens early on. As I'm preparing for a meeting that morning. If you've got a really great deck, that actually goes a long way. That tells me you can probably sell. If you've got a great, thoughtful Notion one-pager on what you're building, you've really thought it out, that tells me you're really smart. I think the biggest risk is just getting lost in the mushy middle. You have to have something distinctive.
Yeah, I'd say we probably get a few dozen cold outreaches or warm intros a week, but the ones that we take are highly filtered. The ones that we actually have a call with, a lot of times, cold outreach we might not even respond to, just given bandwidth and other priorities. Something that comes, through another investor, like an earlier stage investor, like all of these folks up here, we might usually take a first meeting, but usually give some feedback pretty quickly on if it's not a fit. But our preferred mechanism of sourcing is through strategics. So given our stage, we're pretty much sourcing from health systems, the biggest health systems, biggest payers, biggest device strategics, and pharma, as well as occasionally bankers and law firms. Just given the stage of the companies, they might have engaged a banker, or a banker just might be highly aware of them, given the strategic interest already in the business. And so our preferred mechanism of sourcing, though, is through strategics. That's where we always take the call. There's no hesitancy to take the call. A lot of times we'll take 2, 3, really consider it seriously, given if there's a high strategic interest in the business, especially on the device side. A lot of companies don't reach profitability and hopefully get acquired, and while you don't build a company to get acquired, you build it to get bought, not sold. When a device strategic introduces a company to us that they're highly interested in acquiring, or a health tech strategic payer, big health tech software company does the same thing, it's a signal to us that this is probably the last financing in the business.
For sure. That seems like a phenomenal reason to look at a company as a nice exit path. It's interesting. So it sounds like everyone sees the cold outreach, but sometimes the cold outreach holds a different weight from the warm outreach. So even if, our most recent deal, which was not a health tech deal, was actually a company that was introduced to us from one of our portfolio founders. So even if you're not able to get a warm intro to a VC, it's always possible somehow to get an intro to a portfolio company who then you can build a bit of a relationship there and then get an introduction to their investors. So there's always a way to get to investors without sending like the AI slop outreach that Daniella described. There got quite a few with the wrong name before, like saying that we love clean tech and this is why we should look at this company and we don't invest in clean tech. So speaking of relationships, Daniella and Sean, you both kind of touched on this where either it's a founder a VC that you want to build a relationship with, so you'll meet the founder, or maybe you're speaking to a founder that this company might not be right, but the next one might be, or they might know someone. How do you view building relationships, whether it be with founders or with VCs in building your deal flow? Like, what do you see long term as the value of building those relationships, and how do you go about doing it?
I think everything is a network effect. I believe this so firmly, and there are definitely two different approaches, like building relationships with investors. I think the goal is, like, we'd love to invest together if we align and we are similar humans and get along. And then with founders, even if we didn't end up investing, like, I try to be a good human at the end of the day, and also, like, I genuinely do root for you. And if you have really smart friends, or maybe later down the line something awesome happens, like, we'll catch up. Absolutely. So again, we have made investments from companies, from founders that we have ended up passing on, and just maintained the relationship. That said, early on, if you are a founder, I'll tell you a secret. If you want to just build the relationship with an investor and you're like really not sure exactly what idea you're going to have, and you just think it's a brainstorming call, you're still being evaluated. So there is such a thing as being maybe too early, even though we invest at the earliest stages. We say nothing is too early for us, but we're still, if you make no sense and you're like, I have 5 different ideas and they're here, there, and everywhere, and I'm not even sure I want to be in health, don't show all of your cards. Not that you would, but even if it's casual, investors are listening closely.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that mode that a lot of early stage founders in particular are in, which is, I don't know if I need to raise just yet, but I'll probably raise at some point in the next 9 months. Should I build, quote unquote, relationships with investors? There's a mode of that is not productive, at least for us, which is, you schedule a catch-up call every 2 months and you basically just re-pitch me every 2 months. That's, I don't think, a good use of the founder's time or our time. If that's a productive conversation and it's useful for you, great. Do it with a small set of folks who you're testing to see if you like working with them. But sometimes, to your point, less can be more, and I can be more excited if you don't tell me much, but just allude to a little bit and say, hey, we don't need your money right now, but let's talk in 6 months. Then I'll be knocking on your door. I would advise that in a lot of situations.
For sure. And Ruth, on average, how long do you know a founder, does Windham know a founder before you invest in the company? Is it like a 6-month relationship before you guys pull the trigger, or is it something shorter?
So like some companies will have tracked for like 5 years, right? From like near inception to like through FDA approval or through, being deployed at blue chip customers. So we might know the founder in that case for 5 years. What we also see at our stage is, founders transitioning to like CTO or other roles within the company. So sometimes we'll know of a company and the original founder isn't there anymore. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, kind of depends on the situation. So I'd say it's anywhere from 5, 10, could be 10 years to a few months even, especially if it's like a recent management change. A lot of times what we see, like a new commercial leader coming into the company and they're really compelling and it's someone we might already know from the industry. And that's maybe when we might have known the company for 5 years, but we really take a closer look. So that's the one differentiator, which, we sometimes see a difference between founder and CEO and president of the company at our stage.
Fair. Interesting signal of like, we like this person leading the business, regardless of whether or not they're the founder. Now we're diving in. I think that's so common later stage that like I feel like you rarely see at the earlier stage, at least with founders. So shifting gears a little bit to focus, after you've had the first meeting, hopefully the second meeting, maybe you've shared the data room with the team, the VCs are starting to do a little bit of diligence. I'm curious, like Sean, what's the most common thing that kills a deal for you in the diligence process? Like whether it's something that a founder might reveal about the company or something you see in the data room, like what is the biggest no for you? Or fastest no, I should say.
Yeah, I think like those red wires, the like quick no's, I'm not going to generalize, I think, because I think they're different every time you come across cap table issues, or if you get really far along in diligence and you're really in legal diligence, sometimes IP hasn't been appropriately protected or assigned. There are mistakes like that we see. I think at sort of the early mid-phase of diligence, what often kills it for us as we're starting to dig in is just realizing the founder does not have a really good grasp on their competitive universe. Just when you're getting squishy answers on who's done this before, who's tried this 4 times over the past decade, and who else has raised $6 million to do this in the past 6 months, if you can't really speak to that, we kind of get we get spooked. You should be the expert on your market, and we shouldn't be learning things and then bringing it to you. So that, I think, is probably the biggest killer of diligence, in that second, third meeting phase.
That's fair. What about you, Daniela? Are there any pet peeves or things that you see sometimes that it's just immediate no when you see that?
I definitely agree that we've seen some funky cap tables and things revealed through that. It's always painful, but in references, often founders might not know what other people would say about them, or sometimes we'll back channel if we're connected to your first investor. We'll ask. You can also learn a lot, of course, by talking to customers, and often they're not willing to pay, or they aren't actually as excited about what you're building that you might think. We call that happy ears, which I definitely have too. And also, one other thing, just being very precise with language around traction. If we find out that you said ARR and you really mean revenue run rate, and no one is signed because we asked for the contracts, being very precise with the exact traction is so important.
That's so true. My answer would have been overinflating traction. So it's huge. Obviously lying, but that goes without saying.
No one's a liar here.
And speaking of traction, traction looks so different early stage versus late. Early stage for us, oftentimes people will say, like Daniela mentioned, we have contracts that total X in ARR, and either they might not be signed or they're not contracts that are full ramp. There's such a variety of what traction looks like at different stages early on. So Ruth, what's good traction for you? I know that you're obviously at a variety of stages, but in general, what traction metrics perk your ears up and make you think I'm going to bring this deal into Windham?
Yeah, it's typically reoccurring contracts with blue chip customers. So in the health system world, that's probably the most applicable here, seeing reoccurring contracts with Northwells, Mount Sinai's, UPMC's, Cleveland Clinics, Orlando Health's, Mayo, Kaiser, et cetera, seeing reoccurring contracts, not just, oh yeah, we're at Mayo, but you've been at Mayo for 2 months. Okay, you were at Mayo last year, now you upsold to Mayo, now you have a larger contract with Mayo, seeing that, the increase in those reoccurring contracts, and the stickiness in the business is, I think, the most traction that we look for. If a customer doesn't renew, we don't discount that and just completely write off the deal. But if we dig in and find a good reason for that, and the company pivoted since that, we'll still consider it. But the reoccurring contracts and landing and expanding too within big institutions is important. For the stickiness of the business and making it hard to rip out of health systems. We know it's hard to get in to health systems, to get through value acquisition committees and get through IT and get through all the red tape to be deployed at a health system. But then once you're in the health system, you don't want to be easy to remove. You want to be permanent in their workflow, because that will make for a sustainable business.
Yeah. How do you view funky cap tables in companies? Because I know early stage, it's kind of a more severe issue in some cases because it's a more difficult problem to solve. And sometimes at later stages, depending how you look at the deal, it could be easier, and in some cases it could be more difficult. So how do you view cap table issues when you look at a data room or you look at a cap table of a company?
Yep. Every company is different, and we see everything. So sometimes we'll actually be the first institution in a founder-owned business. So it could be only a few people on the cap table, and they're all common, and there's no majority shareholder of the business. And in that case, that is the dream. Yeah, we've done a few of those. And while those seem nice, they're very difficult because you are basically taking ownership of the business and recapping the business. And so that, while the cap table is simple and you're making it, adding senior participating preferred security on top of some common shareholders, it comes with a lot of dynamics that you have to be aware of, and you want to properly incentivize not just the founding team, but also the current management of the business. And so being cognizant of how, you're refreshing the common shareholders and their options to incentivize them to continue to run the business to success is really important. And then we'll see really complicated cap tables with liquidation preferences and dividends and valuation caps, and we do a lot of that at our stage. There's a lot of participating preferred securities, liquidation preferences, value caps on valuation, caps on liquidation, dividends, and so it makes for a very complex environment. But ultimately, we want to, through all of that, not just generate good returns for ourselves, but ensure that the management team is properly incentivized to run the company. And so we typically refresh, the option pool with every round that we lead.
That's super important. I would say for myself as well, when I see a cap table and the founders are not being properly compensated in terms of shares, it's always a red flag. And then we think, how do we solve this in this round? Because it's hard to move forward if founders aren't incentivized to build their businesses and are excited to own a significant part of their business. So now moving into the final block of kind of topics that we're going to focus on more health tech specific realities. I want to start with regulatory risk and how different investors view regulatory risk. I'm sure a lot of founders who may be in med tech or building some sort of device have heard a lot of VCs say, sorry, we don't do any FDA, or we don't do any companies that require FDA approval. And every fund thinks of FDA approval a little bit differently. So we're just going to run through really quickly, starting with Sean, of whether or not your fund invests in FDA companies or companies that require FDA approval. And if you do, how do you evaluate that risk, or how do you invest before that FDA approval? And if you don't, maybe a very quick why not?
When we have done it, what we're looking for is getting out of just binary risk. We generally like to invest when there's optionality and different paths for a business forward, and so we would probably be more likely to do it if you can fail your FDA process and still have an exciting business to build by doing some other pathway, something else. So that's how we would think about it.
We do invest in companies that need to go through the FDA at the earliest stage before making a pre-seed investment. We want to see that there's also a path for you potentially to monetize before then. And also, as you said, if it doesn't work out, we rely heavily on experts. And that's something that, as a founder, you can lean on as well and have those early consultant conversations to be able to show investors evidence and therefore confidence and things for them to diligence in lieu of an FDA approval at the earliest stage, which of course is impossible. And then I'd say also at the slightly later stage, so a later seed for us, we're expecting more evidence, and the kinds of things that experts are going to say is going to be slightly different. We need to have confidence that it's going to work. Of course, we always want to have confidence it's going to work, even at the earliest stages. But this is really nuanced and very important because, for example, if it's how do we know that your model is the best, way better? In lieu of you having already proven it, gone through, pivotal trial, all that, it's hard to know. So having as much data and evidence as you can, and relying on experts is very important.
Yeah, on the device side, we typically try to invest post FDA approval, where we're taking a lot of reimbursement and commercial risk, especially in Class 2 devices. It's with the 510K. It's, to be honest, really not hard to get a 510K approved. You don't need to raise venture capital money to get a 510K approved in most clinical specialties. So we could still be a first institutional investor in a FDA-approved Class 2 device business, where we're taking, potentially further regulatory risk with the next generations of the device, or, future potential de novos, or but then we're also taking a huge amount of reimbursement risk and commercial risk, which is, there's a lot of commercial risk still left in after FDA approval in the Class 2 device world. On the Class 3 device world, we actually will in cardiovascular invest before FDA approval because a lot of cardiovascular device companies get acquired at PMA approval. So we will invest before PMA approval, but we typically then will structure some sort of deal with a strategic to have the exclusive right to buy the business at PMA approval. So typically that deal will come through a strategic, and it'll be, there'll be clinical data, so we'll see a lot of clinical data already. The company will be entering usually a pivotal study and be 18 to 24 months out from approval, and maybe there's a right to buy at approval or a right to buy a few years down the road. So we'll take that sort of FDA risk in cardiovascular because with clinical data and early feasibility studies, you can see a path to approval. But there's still risk in the business, but most of those technologies do get acquired at approval.
And Daniella, you mentioned something interesting that you encourage founders to have a little bit of revenue before getting FDA approval, or finding like some sort of path where I guess the revenue is not make or break with regards to the FDA approval. What are some examples of how founders can find some revenue without selling to actual or having their product to patients or whatever it might be? Like, what are some examples of revenue that they can look for?
This is a really great question. An example is, say you're a diagnostic company. Is there a way that you can have some version of your product, say it's like a digital diagnostic, that your customers are still able to use, not in a diagnostic way? It's a simple switch of like, this is an assistive tool, or making a recommendation, but not actually diagnostic. So if there are different versions of your product where you can not like dumb it down to say, but I guess in a way to do that, so that you can pilot it, show value, and ultimately get people to pay for it, but not in a making a specific kind of claim way.
One of our portfolio companies does something similar. They're called Neuralite, and they could be a diagnostic if they wanted to be. They're a digital product, but they're using being an endpoint, like in a biomarker in clinical trials, as like an interim revenue source, where you work kind of in a research setting and you're able to generate revenue, but you don't necessarily need full FDA approval to move down that path. So it's always interesting to see founders like hustle for money early on. It's very important, I think, from an investor's perspective, to see that they're able to do that early on. It's very reassuring that down the line, once they do have that FDA approval, that there will be revenue. It's not like a build it and they will come kind of scenario. It's like they've had the nose for the money from the beginning. And so the other kind of scary word in the health tech space, aside from FDA, is reimbursement or insurance. So what is your favorite way to see a founder address reimbursement in a pitch? And how do you evaluate reimbursement risk when you're looking at a company, Sean?
So, insurance reimbursement will apply to some but not all health tech companies, obviously. But so for when it is relevant and your plan is to have a code that you're going to be billing against, what I think is really effective and is sometimes missed is we obviously care about how much you're going to get paid, but what we're really asking about is what's your margin. So don't just say, and here's the CPT code, and here's how much we're going to make for each service provided. Describe the costs associated with that, because healthcare is this weird market where actually the prices are mostly fixed. You often know the price up front. The more interesting conversation for us as investors is tell us the margin on that code, and that's where technology gets really interesting. So I prefer conversations that are margin focused.
Interesting. What about you, Daniella?
I think that you're the coolest person if you are a serious code nerd and you've known the history of this code, you know how easy it is, you know the tailwinds and also the headwinds, and you just really understand and exude confidence that you really understand just how this thing's going to get paid for. Margins could not be more important, and also how you expand the margins. And again, not everything needs to go through reimbursement. There's SaaS. There are other ways to show value to whether your customer is digital health or other kinds of customers, and that's important too.
I totally agree with you. Ruth, on your end, like I would assume there's evidence in a lot of cases of how reimbursement looks for certain products. How does that change the way you guys evaluate reimbursement risk, if at all? And do you think more on that end about how do you negotiate maybe bigger contracts with payers to actually raise that ceiling on revenue? What's the strategy later stage?
Yeah, there's more evidence to say the least, and sometimes a lot more hair and orange flags maybe, because you can see actually proof of like denied insurance claims and the device or technology not being paid for, which is fixable, right? It's not like, okay, the device was denied, or it went from a didn't reach a Category 1 code, it's stuck at a Category 3 code, or these MACs didn't approve technology and it's been downgraded and has an LCD. We've faced a lot of those situations before, and it's about the plan to overcome that is what we're investing in. And so on the device side, a lot of times to go from a Cat 3 to a Cat 1 CPT code, which is kind of the gold standard is Category 1 CPT code, and that's how you establish your own reimbursement rate and differentiate yourself from the competition and increase your margins and increase your profit. A lot of times we're investing in RCT and additional clinical data, patient registries to get enough evidence to go from Cat 3 to Cat 1, or just increase reimbursement in whatever shape is appropriate for the company. So there's evidence, but it's really the plan to go from the lower level of reimbursement to the higher level of reimbursement, or to expand reimbursement, or alter the device to fit within a different CPT code to ensure that coverage is maintained. And so a lot of times we're just investing in that plan, and doing a lot of work up front in our diligence with reimbursement experts, with CROs, with even people at CMS, to figure out, is this a viable path forward? And that's usually as long as the company's and we're investing in that viable path forward, we can see that. And as we're on the board of the company, obviously pushing that path forward. So there is, while there's risk and evidence, there has to be a plan to mitigate that risk.
Before we go to audience Q&A, we're going to do a bit of a lightning round of a couple quick questions, quick answers from all our panelists. What is the best thing a founder ever did in the fundraising process with you that most founders don't do?
Turned down an offer for more money and took less money.
Having the good kind of aggression.
Ruth?
Be value add to us. I think that's when you're introducing, a venture firm to something, or private equity, whatever, investment firm to something that's valuable to them, whether it's a potential LP, a co-investor, a strategic partner. That goes a long way, because if, we think we're giving value to you, well, if you give value to us, we're like, this is a win-win. And we look at our, best CEOs and entrepreneurs as partnerships. It's not a one-way street. It's not like we're giving them money and we're like, okay, here you go. It's like they're a lot of times giving us not just financial returns, but value add, strategic add returns. So that's a helpful push.
So this kind of answers a little bit the next question I was going to ask, is like, what is one thing founders almost never ask you, but they should?
Seriously and genuinely asking for specific feedback, and then the next step is engaging with it and sometimes pushing back. Like, this is awesome. You probably know more than us. I think it's great.
I wouldn't say it's that rare, but I think more founders should really try to get an in-person second meeting. Just meet people in person as quickly as you possibly can. And if they say no and they're nearby, that's a helpful signal for you.
So true. I would say actually reference calls, like asking VCs to meet their other portfolio companies and asking those portfolio companies, how have they been helpful? Like, why are they good investors? And doing kind of the reverse interviews, I think, always really valuable. And the last one is, if you were a health tech founder today, what problem would you be working on? We'll start with Sean and then we'll come back to Ruth. Here.
I'm personally really interested in sort of the healthcare labor force, workforce transition that, I think is happening right now and will happen over the next decade. So that's where I'd spend time.
I would be working in payments, how we pay.
Probably be working on a software SaaS company that sells to pharma and med device companies to cut a lot of their margins and unfortunately probably lay off people, but then improve their margins.
Amazing. Okay. So with that, I'd love to open the floor to the audience and let you all ask any questions you have for our panelists.
We have discussed about regulatory and then about reimbursement. And you were mainly talking about the US, but at the end there's a big ex-US part and it's very fragmented. Do you factor this in? How important is the ex-US part in growing the business?
I can start. We want to see U.S. regulatory and reimbursement first and foremost. Everything else is just like cherries on top. So focus on whether it's even if it's an ex-U.S. company, they have to be commercializing and scaling within the U.S. market.
Now you talked about pitch decks, and scientific founders for like pre-seed rounds. I assume they tend to be like very detailed and maybe miss the point or maybe don't get to the meat of the thing. Is there? Could you dumb down a pitch deck too much, or is it simplify things? And what's a sweet spot, or what are some of the issues that you've had with pitch decks?
I can take a stab at this. Yes, I've seen definitely some pitch decks that are way too simple. Some of the accelerator programs are notorious for having, won't name names, very simple pitch decks that don't tell you what the company really does. So the most important things that we need to know, 2048 cares so much about the team. I'm sure everyone does here, but put the team slide very close to the top. We need to know what your big vision is. This is like our third question. If we take a first meeting, we need to know where it's going. Then we need to know what it is that you do and be very clear so that we can understand in not too much time what it is that the tech actually does, and spend a lot of time, if you have it. You don't need to if it's pre-seed and that's okay. But traction. Nothing speaks louder than revenue, so highlight that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the only thing I would add is a lot of founders in their pitch decks really spend time talking about the big opportunity. We're going to have $100 million revenue in the next 5 years, whatever it is. Fine, okay, tell us it's a big opportunity, but also tell us exactly how you're going to hit your next round's ARR milestone, really concretely. So if you're raising a seed, make it just obvious to me how you're going to get to pick whatever you think the number is for Series A, but show me your pipeline and your contracts and your expected ACV and how you're going to get there. So concrete about the near-term milestone and throw in the long-term milestone because some investors really care about it.
I would say also on the science front, a lot of scientific founders or founders coming straight out of university or grad school will focus way too much on the solution, like the details of the science of their product and why that's unique, and they will very much gloss over the problem, or like the problem is that there is a disease and like that's the problem, instead of going into the details of like I guess the financials of the disease or like the context on the burden of that condition and why others haven't been able to address it. I think that's always a little bit missed in decks that are too technical.
Thank you for the panel, first of all. Second, at the beginning you started by mentioning, I think, front office, investment, etc. What in the current ecosystem today, what's a mode where everybody can just vibe code something and there's 200 companies building voice agents? How do you identify the mode? How do you know that that's a good differentiator?
I'm cognizant of, and a lot of investors I think are, of these algorithms and AI companies, whatever, being trained on proprietary data sets. So like in the hospital world, you're seeing a lot of like hospital spin-outs. Like I know there's like companies powered by HSS or powered by Mayo or powered by MD Anderson Cancer Center, right? So like having a clinical first superior, proprietary data set that actually empowers the algorithm and the technology creates a mode that, right, to replicate that, you would have to or like even if it's a compilation of leading health systems or leading institutions, creating the algorithm on top of that moat makes it very difficult for others to recreate that, especially if it's like an exclusive license with royalties from a hospital. I think that's how you really create a moat around these businesses.
Absolutely. Differentiation and defensibility come through strong data moats, and this can accrue over time, and that can be a feature also what it is that you're building. But you raise a really important point. If you can spin up a copycat voice AI company in a weekend, why would anyone choose you? They'll just go to the next guy that's cheaper. So this is why we invest in vertical AI, and what we mean by that is, yes, there are incredible horizontal AI companies, but when it comes to health in particular, being specialty specific can be a very important moat. If you know exactly why this voice AI company isn't working in physical therapy, for example, as we've been hearing loud and clear across specific specialties, because a horizontal solution is too fits most, but not specialty specific. This is really important, and we see moats accrue by really deeply knowing and trusting and having a narrow customer to start and crushing it from there and then expanding.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to say that SaaS is dead, but I don't know that I entirely buy that, honestly. I don't think writing code was ever the really hard thing about a software business. I think it's always been distribution, customer relationships, implementation. I don't think those have gotten that much easier right now, and so I think there's still software to be built, and I think there's still moats to fight for.
Given that it's become a lot cheaper to build in the recent months, have you had instances where you've turned companies away saying, we actually don't think you need venture, we're not a good partner for you? And do you also see this affecting your deal sourcing and your deal sourcing strategies?
There's a company and they're doing so well. Like, why are you coming to us? Why are you just self-funding this? Usually there's a reason. Like if you have an amazing business that's revenue generating and you don't need venture, you're probably not coming to venture, but you're coming to us for something very specific. So I would say that like you also have to think very deeply about what it is that you want from an investor too. But I do think it still is really important to invest in tech, even if it is a dime a dozen. This is just our hot take. I don't know if others agree, but having a CTO is still really important. And I don't think the margin shifts you're going to see from them are going to completely change what is also really difficult, which is having like a really good product that is able to be sold and loved by customers. All of these principles are still very true.
Yeah, I think we're seeing in some companies that are able to have really lean tech teams, they're earlier on in their journey, so say post-seed, but around the Series A, their spend is switching from R&D to sales and marketing much earlier than we might otherwise see, and so they're still raising, but they're putting it to work differently. And we are seeing successful companies raising more measured rounds. I said that was an example before of something I like a founder did, and turning down a $15 million A to raise 8 because that's the right amount and you can execute with it. I think that's great, and people are doing that right now, so it's happening.
That's something to be cognizant of how much tokens cost, and the cost of Claude and tokens are, if you're really powering a whole company off them and deploying to a lot of customers, that might end up being more expensive than employees. So I think just being cognizant of the token shortage and data centers and that whole dynamic while you're building a company based, using Claude and other agentic, AI platforms to run the company, there might be a not to predict anything, but there could be a fallout and boom of that eventually, and a good company will last through that boom and bust.
AI drug discovery seems like it is happening. Like phase 1 pass rate has jumped up pretty significantly. Are there any risks or opportunities that you all are thinking about downstream of that?
In pharma, people focus on drug discovery, commercial, clinical trials especially, but no one focuses on CMC and manufacturing, which is if you you can develop, a novel modality, have a target, you can, have good first-in-human data, but if you can't build it at scale and manufacture it at scale, especially in like biologics and cell and gene therapies, CMC, chemical manufacturing controls is a crucial part of that, and a lot of biotech companies and pharma companies overlook that as they're scaling a drug through clinical trials, even into commercial. So I would just be cognizant of CMC and manufacturing.
When you talk about team, can you talk about like the characteristics that you look for in a solid team? Like, is it somebody who's started a startup 7 times? Is it what are you looking for?
Sometimes you meet someone and you go, I really want to work with this person, or like, I love this person's vision, and they have a combination of like hustle and grit while also being quite skeptical and very honest with themselves of where shortcomings are in the business or in the industry, where they're at with figuring out their company. And I think like that ability to look outwards but also be very introspective is something I get very excited about in a founder. And then having that person paired with a great executor, like a great technical person who puts the vision into something concrete, is like, to me, that's a dream team.
Industry expertise and industry relationships. I think that, like, if the C-suite of a health tech company was X health system or X payers or whatnot, like, if they lived their customers already as in their previous jobs, I think that's always really interesting to us.
That definitely shows up in fluency in the market and ability to sell, having that kind of commercial experience. If you've sold a company before, amazing. That's usually not the case, especially for younger founders or truly earliest stage founders when this is your first company. I think there are a lot of founders in the room, so I mean this with a good heart, but it's like actually the most irrational thing you could ever do is starting a company. So you have to be irrational and like love risk. What kind of person wants to make no money for a while, work so hard, not fully knowing when, how they're gonna make money? But that is another way to say you have a lot of grit, and you can just sense when someone is gonna like run through a million walls until they figure it out. We wanna invest in those people. When you have passion too and charisma, like, I want to join your parade, you're just magnetic, like, I want to be around you, I want to work with you, it's a long-term relationship, all these attributes, like, I really look up to you, I think you're going to do something amazing, and we want to figure this out together. Those are also very important attributes too.
Yeah, market fluency is a good one, and financial fluency as well. You should know your own numbers if you're a founder. Not all founders really have a grasp on the finances of their own business.
Any other?
Around the introduction part, warm intro, I know most investors obviously prefer a warm intro because of trust. But if you happen to be in such events as these ones, and you happen to meet investors such as yourselves, how do you perceive when we go and talk to you and when we pitch you like 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes? Do you guys actually value that, or are you like, okay, this is just like, too many people, hard to remember, or it's like, it's just another cold reach? Just curious.
That's a good question. I find it most helpful in these situations if you're sort of you don't lead with the pitch, but just lead like a person. Just, let's talk about what you're working on, and let the pitch kind of flow through. In these settings, it's really sometimes hard as investors. It can be hard to just keep track of, if you get pitched 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. So talk to us like people, not like ATMs.
You pitched me earlier, sir, and it was very good. Always, of course, open, like, we're humans. Seeing a deck is like the most helpful thing, honestly, just to make sure that I'm cognizant of your time too. It's a stage fit and all of that. So always follow up over email, LinkedIn. Like, we're easy to find, and usually we see it. And if it's not a fit, like, we're saving both of us time then.
I'd say read the room, read the investors' kind of body language, especially like if they look like they're in a rush to get somewhere and have a lot to do. The last thing they want is to be pitched at. So, reach out on LinkedIn or find our emails and send it through that channel.
I'll just add, I love getting like a bunch of pitches. Like I love, but I don't love getting swarmed. Like I echo all those sentiments of like, you can tell sometimes when people are treating you like an ATM, or like people do not care about you, the investor, or why you might be helpful to them. They're just like, this is my company, give me money. Like that I don't love, but I love to hear what people are building, like very high level, but more importantly, why they're building it. And I think in a quick meeting, like in an event, I want to hear like, this is where I'm from and why I'm building this, and then from there I'm like, okay, let's connect and we'll chat. And usually I end up having some sort of a call later if that like 3-minute chat was worthwhile and I didn't feel bored or like insulted, which is usually not the case.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing that would make lives better for you and for them, what would that one thing be?
Solve a real problem. Problem first. Not science first. Sorry. It's very blunt.
I'd say know how it gets commercialized. Your science is like your baby often. We see this for a lot of PhDs that are spinning out, but know where it goes, not just that it needs to see the light of day.
Yeah, I don't have a PhD, so in those conversations, I'm going in assuming that it works. So tell me everything else.
Well, with that, I thank you all so much for listening. More importantly, I thank our amazing panelists for taking the time out of their day to be here, answer questions, and talk and be pitched endlessly. So let's have a big round of applause for our panelists.